Good afternoon and welcome everyone. My name is Annette Johns and I'm the Associate Director of Policy and Practice with the Newfoundland and Labrador College of Social Workers. I will be the moderator for today's education event, Fundamentals of Vaping, the new look of nicotine addiction as a public health issue. This is a very timely topic given that this is National Non-Smoking Week. This webinar presentation will be approximately 50 minutes, followed by a 10-minute question and answer period that I will moderate. Please note that all the details you need, like how to access the slide deck and other housekeeping information, is included in the housekeeping and announcement widget. All the widgets can be accessed by clicking the blue and white icons at the bottom of your window. You can also resize and move around any of the elements you see on your screen to customize your viewing experience. During the presentation, I encourage you to type in your questions using the question mark icon at any time, and I'll begin asking the questions at the end of the presentation. Please note that only the presenter and I can see the questions. So now I want to introduce our speaker. Tracy Sharp-Smith is a registered social worker here in Newfoundland and Labrador. She convocated from MUN with her BSW in 2005 and has been with the Health Promotion Division of Population and Public Health with Eastern Health since 2019 as Healthy Communities Consultant and Lead for Tobacco. Prior to this, Tracy worked with mental health and addictions for 13 years in various roles and was a regional addictions prevention consultant with Eastern Health for 8 years prior to moving to population and public health. I'm so pleased that Tracy is delivering this webinar for us today, and without further ado, I'll now pass the virtual podium over to Tracy to begin the presentation.
Hi, thank you, Annette, and thanks to everyone online today who joined on this beautiful day. I don't know what part of the province you're in, but where I'm in, here in I'm working from home in Bay Roberts. It's actually a beautiful day here today, so I hope everyone gets a chance to enjoy it. Thanks to Annette for reaching out and asking for this presentation. It's while we've all, I guess, in some regard been focused on COVID, it's nice for us to look at other things that are happening in our world, and certainly vaping is an emerging public health issue. And so I'm really glad to have the opportunity to present this to you today. I do have a printed copy of my slides in front of me, so if you see me looking at my slide deck, it's just to make sure I haven't missed anything. So I want to start out just with an acknowledgement that this presentation was initially, I guess, adapted with permission from Massachusetts Public Health back in October of 2019 through the Newfoundland and Labrador Alliance for the Control of Tobacco. I sit as a board member on ACT, and we were looking at the time at different campaigns, both nationally and internationally, from a health education perspective and an awareness perspective, and we found this particular I guess presentation from Massachusetts, and they gracefully allowed us to adapt. It has been adapted several times, and most recently for us here today to include some up-to-date and relevant legislation and changes that have happened recently in Newfoundland and Labrador. So in terms of our agenda, it's a little bit robust, but hopefully we'll get through it all and have time for questions at the end. Really, I'm going to walk you through and look at, why are we here today? What is the purpose or the intention of us connecting here today to look at the vaping as a population health issue? Why is it even an issue? So I'm going to help set the context in terms of what vaping looks like in Newfoundland and Labrador, and also from a national perspective as well. I want to talk a little bit about the industry. And when I say the industry, what I really mean is the tobacco industry. They are certainly a key player in both the evolution of not only the traditional tobacco industry, but now the vaping industry. And we're going to look at, I guess, the significant role that they have played in terms of, unfortunately, evolving this public health issue for us. We're going to talk about what vaping actually is in terms of how it works, how people use it, and of course that's going to lead us into discussion around the risks, both from a short-term and long-term perspective. I will say that the evidence that I will present today is certainly as most up-to-date as it can be. Given that this is a relatively newer public health and emerging issue, we're limited to the research that has been done to date. But I will speak to that certainly for what is most up to date. I did edit the presentation today so that we could just chat for a moment around COVID in terms of some of the, the studies or what we're looking at in terms of impact that COVID has had on vaping in the context of today, especially where we are with this pandemic. I'm going to walk us through some of the relevant policies and legislation, both from a provincial perspective and nationally, to see what we're doing around this public health issue. And hopefully then we're going to have a chance to talk a little bit about what does this mean for us as social workers. For myself, as Annette said, I am a lead for tobacco within the Population Public Health Division in Eastern Health. So I have a direct role. But I think what we can see as we talk through this today is that there's a role really for all of us in terms of prevention, protection, and cessation, whether we look at it from our regulatory body, or we look at it as individual social workers, and whatever role that we might play in our systems. Okay. So again, like I said, while we're here, we're going to learn about e-cigarettes, and you'll see throughout the presentation, we'll see some language interchanged. So we may say e-cigarette, we may say vape product, but what we're really talking about is vaping. They are, mutually exclusive to one another. And I want to talk about some of the public health measures that have been changing. The landscape has been changing, and some of that's come from public pressure to look at some healthy public policy and looking at where we can go from here. And we're also going to take a bit of time looking at where people can get help. So if we recognize that there's people that need support around their vaping behavior, where do we go in Newfoundland and Labrador for that right now? So to help us set the context, I want to walk you through some of the more recent statistics or data that has been collected. And there's several data sources. The ones I'm going to talk about today particularly is a relatively newer survey, which is the Canadian Tobacco and Nicotine Survey. The data that we have most recently for this one is 2020. And what we've seen is that there really continues to be a growth in usage particularly among our youth population. In 2020, about 14% of youth aged 15 to 19 reported having vaped in past 30 days. And over 1/3 also reported at trying it at some point in their lives. We can see that there's a continued generational difference in terms of the use of vape devices. Again, we are seeing, not just in our province, but nationally, that vaping is certainly more common amongst younger Canadians, and we're going to talk a little bit about why that is. And about 3% of adults who are aged 25 plus report using a vape product in the past 30 days. So not to say that it's only an issue for youth, but statistically, when we look at those higher rates, they seem to have a tendency to fall in that lower age group. And there is somewhat of a noticeable difference in terms of gender. If you look at this particular survey, seems to be higher amongst the male population in terms of ever trying a vape product. The 2021 data for this survey was to be released, but right now it's to be determined, and mainly some of that delay is due to COVID. Again, from a context perspective, what's, interesting from this survey as well is that amongst the younger Canadians, again, aged that 15 to 19-year-old age group, the most commonly reported reason why this age group cited their use of vape products is because they enjoyed it, right? And second to that, at 26%, was because they wanted to try it. So there's a curiosity about what vapes are, what they do, how they're used. And then next to that, at 23% for this age group, they identify wanting to use to reduce stress. So we're starting to see those internal reasons for use outside of that curiosity factor. On the other hand, the age group 20 to 25 are more likely to report vaping. They report because they enjoy it as well. But this is where we start to see a little bit of a shift and moving into looking at vaping as a possible smoking cessation aid. And that actually increases when we look at an even older age group. So Canadians 25 and older are more likely to report that they use a vape product to try to achieve smoking cessation. And that comes in at about 53%. So overall, we have seen, the population choosing to vape to reduce stress amongst that 20 to 25-year age group. At 14% in 2019 to 24% up to 2020. So we are seeing that steadily increase. So that's more from that national landscape. In terms of local data, we pull this from the Canadian Student Tobacco, Alcohol, Drug Use Survey. Again, because of some restrictions around COVID, this is the most recent data that we have. The next survey for this one was expected to be 2020, 2021, but there are delays in getting that survey completed. This is a survey that is done by the Propel Health Impact Center at the University of Waterloo. And in 2018, 2019, what this graph is showing us right here is that we've been seeing an increase in ever trying an e-cigarette or a vape product in from 37.7% up to 46.9%. And so that's students. So again, that younger age category. And why this is of concern is that this particular statistic showed an increase of 24% over a 2-year period. So anytime we see an increase like this going up like that, it's certainly a cause for concern. Also from the same survey, what we've also seen is that 30% of students in Newfoundland and Labrador in grades 7 through 12 reported using a vape product in the past 30 days, which is again up from 22%, which was 2016-2017 data. So that's a 36% increase, again, from a 2-year perspective. In the past 30-day use of e-cigarettes amongst students in Newfoundland and Labrador in grades 7 to 12 is over 3 times higher, 29.9%, than those who ever reported ever smoking a cigarette in the past 30 days. So nationally and locally, we're seeing a decrease in traditional cigarette smoking rates amongst our youth population. And on the flip side of it, we're certainly seeing a significant, and we have seen a significant increase in the use of vape products in this age group. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the things that may have contributed to those such huge, I guess, increases in numbers. One of the things that we have seen across Canada has really been the introduction of certain vape products. So we'll see that not all vape products are created equally. And in particular, certain brands such as Juul, that when they came into the market in 2018, that's when we really started to see an increase, I guess a spike in youth use. And we'll talk to you a little bit about that later when we get into the industry and the role that they've been playing. So in terms of what youth tell us, we just heard that, statistically we're seeing increased rates in our province. We're seeing them increase across Canada. And it's not just Canada. We're seeing those increases in the US and internationally as well. And for the most part, what youth tell us is that it has been consistently observed in various studies that youth are most likely to cite the reasons that they use vape or vape products. First, for the most part, is due to social influences, right? So those areas where they have friends that are using, other students, for example, that might be using, that kind of rates as the highest reason that youth self-report their reason for vaping is because of that social influence. And that comes out right here in this data at friends at 58%. And the second reason has been, so again, from a self-reported perspective, due to the flavors, right? And we're going to talk a little bit about flavoring and some changes that have been happening around flavoring. So those are the two key areas that we have concern around. And so what can we do really about those areas to try to reduce use amongst our youth population? So even though youth tell us that, it's those social areas that they access, or that is the reason, one of their influences for engaging in vaping behavior first and foremost, where do they get vapes? Where is this population even getting access to vape and vape products? So what we've seen across, kind of from a Canadian context, is that 65% of students who are in grade 7 to 12 who used an e-cigarette or vape in the last 30 days told us that it came from a social source at 65%. That has gone up from 56% in 2016-2017 timeframe. And these social sources, like I said, include friends. It could be family, whether it was bought, paid for, given freely, stolen, whatever that context might have been, it come from that social area. And accessing that e-cigarette through a social source was higher among students in grades 7 through 9 at 73% versus those in grades 10 to 12 at 62%. Now, some of the reasoning behind that, and which is where some of the push for increasing minimum legal purchase age comes from, the idea and understanding that the closer you get to legal age, the more likely it is. So if I'm a grade 12 student and if I'm, say, 17, I'm that much closer to the legal age. So I'm more likely to go into a store and try to purchase, a substance like a vape product or alcohol or tobacco or cannabis if I'm closer to that actual minimum legal age myself. If I'm in grade 8, chances are if I try to do that, I'm going to get ID'd. I'm not going to be able to purchase that substance, but I might, ask a friend or a relative or someone who's, say, if I'm 16 and I have a friend who's 18, we're in that social network with each other. They have access to that substance, then that becomes my, into that purchasing power. Okay. And 1/4 of students in grades 7 to 12 who used the vape in the past 30 days also reported getting that e-cigarette from a retail store. Okay. So again, the older you get, the closer to that legal purchase age, the more risks or more chances that it is that you're going to be trying to purchase that product yourself versus purchasing it from a social support or social source. And that, impacts, again, from a policy and healthy public policy perspective, what do we need to do to ensure that those who are close to that minimum legal purchase age but are not yet legal, how do we ensure that they are not able to purchase that product? Because it would still be illegal. If I am 18, I'm still not old enough. So some of that plays into looking at educating our outlets that sell the products. How do we enforce those, the policies and the legislation and so forth? Okay. And again, just one little final, statistic or, some data for you. It's just like other tobacco and nicotine products, youth may get e-cigarettes and vape products from many sources, right? So again, this shows us that youth tell us here that the main source is that a friend gave it to me, right? The most common sources for those e-cigarettes, again, in Newfoundland Labrador, are certainly friends. And when it comes to that, from a legal purchasing perspective, e-cigarettes, vape products are sold in many places in Newfoundland and Labrador, and of course across the country. You can purchase them in convenience stores, corner stores, gas shops, and we have vape shops as well. And then there's the online, which is certainly a much more difficult area to try and regulate and control and enforce, but certainly there's work being done around that as well. Under the Newfoundland and Labrador Tobacco and Vapor Control Products Act, all of these products are not allowed to be displayed, they're not allowed to be promoted or advertised at the retail source. An exclusive vape shop can have the product on display, but only inside the store. So there's to be no visible products or displayed or promoted outside of the vape shop itself. But I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of those policies and regulations a little bit later. Okay, so now that I just kind of talked to you about that minimum legal age and social support, so I wanted to talk a little bit about what's changing around that in the Canadian landscape. There are certainly some arguments for and against, but if we look at some of the more traditional opportunities around tobacco control, if we look at what healthy public policy has helped us in the tobacco control lens, we can see that we could probably make some strides with vaping control if we follow some of the similar structures of what we've been able to achieve around the tobacco control. While there is little evidence about the effect of minimum legal age law on youth access from an e-cigarette perspective, again, we can look at the strides that has helped us in tobacco control. And we know that there is certainly, decades of research that tells us and shows us that when we increase that minimum legal purchase age, when we did that for tobacco control, when we did that for, say, alcohol control, and when we have done it now for cannabis, we have seen success in reducing the age of access. So again, one of the arguments is that if we increase that minimum legal purchase age, we're going to see less use amongst our younger population. Prince Edward Island is one of the provinces in Canada that has recently enacted legislation to increase their minimum legal purchase age from 19 to 21, and that's for all tobacco products, conventional tobacco products, and vape products. This past summer, Health Canada put out a call for, some feedback around, what does the general public feel? And there is strong support amongst Canadians to increase that minimum legal purchase age to 21. And again, from an evidence perspective, the experts around health protection have argued that one way that we can reduce those social sources, which we just spent a lot of time identifying as one of those key avenues for youth use, is to actually increase the minimum legal purchase age, increase that enforcement, have media campaigns, look at any kind of fine system for sellers who sell vape products who aren't compliant, and so on and so forth. So now I kind of talked a little bit about, vaping and the context and where we're to in Newfoundland and Labrador and Canada, and some of those higher rates that we've been seeing progressively increase over the last, say, even 10 years, but specifically in the last 5. We're going to talk a little bit about, well, what is this? What is this this public health issue? What is it that people are doing when they say they vape and they purchase a vape? Some of you may have seen it yourself. You may have young children. You may have wondered about it yourself as a smoking cessation aid. There's certainly a lot of mixed messages about it. So I'm just going to take a few minutes and talk about, what vaping is actually and what it's not. Right, because I think there's been a lot of myths around vaping that has led to some of the discourse going awry, and has probably led to some people engaging in vaping because they really weren't aware truly what kind of act they were engaging in, what the actual product was, what it's not. And so a part of this is all about, that education component, so we can make informed decisions about vaping and what we choose to do with it in our life. So what is vaping? When we hear someone say that they vape, vaping really is the act of inhaling and exhaling an aerosol. So that aerosol is often called the vapor. And that's produced by an e-cigarette or a similar battery-powered device. So again, like I said earlier, we can call it a vape or an e-cig or an e-cigarette. There's lots of different names that people use. As you'll see here, other names could be a mod, a pod. We've heard of ENDS, which electronic nicotine delivery system, and there's so more. Like the language, just like the landscape, is constantly evolving. So we're constantly trying to keep up on that language so that we're cognizant and aware of what especially youth are saying about it, so we can be aware of when we hear discussions happening. So that e-cigarette, again, like I said, is a battery-powered vaporizer, actually, that simulates the action and the sensation of smoking, okay? So here's what one example of what an e-cigarette might look like. And here's this diagram, which comes from Health Canada. breaks down the device into its separate components. So we're just going to take a second and have a look at, what actually makes up a vape device. So there's lots, like I said, lots of different names, pins. Some people might call them by the brand name or the type of system it is. Well, you just heard me say Juul earlier. So that's the type of vape with a specific brand name. So while we'll look at this device, most vaping devices do use an electronic power from a battery. And the battery really is used to heat the liquid that's inside of the vape. So we call that, the liquid is often referenced as juice. And that liquid is what's most concern for us, because it's that liquid that usually contains nicotine. And this is where one of the myths came from vapes, especially in the earlier days when there wasn't a lot known about it. A lot of new users and not so new users thought that when they vaped this e-juice, if you will, that may have been flavored like strawberries, they really thought that maybe they were just ingesting a flavored vapor that tasted like strawberries, and probably didn't even realize that actually contained nicotine. There's been some arguments to say that they don't, but what our research and evidence has shown across Canada is that, yes, the majority of vape products that are out there definitely do contain nicotine. Some contain more than others, but regulation has just came into effect to cap the limit on how much nicotine can be found in it. So again, when you use this vape device, the battery heats the liquid. That heat is what causes the solution itself in that liquid pod to become vaporized. And then that vapor condenses into an aerosol. And when you have that aerosol, that's what you would breathe in. You breathe it in through the mouthpiece, and then the vapor then that you inhale goes into your lungs. The remaining vapor is exhaled, and sometimes you can actually see like a vapor cloud. Okay, so the act of using that e-cigarette is called vaping. Okay. So this again is just one example. Here is an image of what some other vape devices might look like. Again, this is usually relevant to the user themselves. So in the top left-hand corner, you'll see, we call it it's a cig-alike. So for those who may be trying to replace their traditional cigarettes with this vape source, they still might like to have a look and feel of a traditional cigarette or a pipe. Obviously, these aren't as popular amongst our younger generation. What we often see in our younger population are the little ones down here in your bottom right-hand corner that often looks like a little USB drive for many reasons. Mainly, the biggest one is that it's really easy to conceal that, right? It can be put in your pocket, down a sleeve, in a jacket. So it can be hidden quite easily from parents, from teachers, and again, it's really that concealability, certainly lends itself to, and then being able to access it quickly. It's small. It's not a great big device that you have to take out, and it's not cumbersome. But they can look like anything from a pen, like a writing pen, to a juice box. Some of these are pre-filled, so they come with a cartridge that's already in it. So you would use the vape as it is. Others come in a system which we call like an open system, where you can kind of refill the vape with a liquid, right? So we call those open and closed systems. You'll see here from this image that the vape juices themselves can come in many different sizes, shapes, colors, flavors. So these would be liquids that you would refill in a refillable pod or open system. So in those open systems, like I said, a user would take that e-liquid, commonly referred to, again, if you hear people say the juice, that's what we're talking about. And they both work the exact same way. There's no, pro or con really in terms of from a vape use perspective to either system. They both act the same way. They'll be vaporized the same way. So we have thousands and thousands of flavors, everything from chocolate to cotton candy, fruit punch, gummy bear, banana, peach, lime, you name it. Any flavor you can think of has probably been produced in these different e-liquid flavors. As I said earlier, you've told us that the second major reason why they tried a vape product or continue to use a vape product is because of the flavors. And so when I said something like gummy bears, caramel apple, as you can see here, Sour Patch candy, it doesn't take a lot to guess that these are certainly geared towards the younger population. And this is where the vape industry has been called to task, we'll say, especially in the last year or so. Okay. So again, just to try to differentiate the difference between, that vapor and the aerosol, the difference between, traditional tobacco is that with a vape, there is no burning. So it doesn't burn. It's not combustible like a traditional tobacco, like a cigarette would be, okay? What we do know is that these e-liquids, the e-juice contains many different chemicals. There's everything in it from propylene glycol to glycerin to water, of course, nicotine, and different flavorings. And some of the concern that comes from that is that people might think that it's only an aerosol, so it's only a vapor, so it's not harmful, that there's no tobacco in it, so what do we have to be worried about? Well, some of the things that the research and the evidence has shown us is that when we inhale the vapor, this aerosol that is produced, some of these can certainly be harmful chemical compounds that we're ingesting from that aerosol. So in addition to the nicotine, we have some of these ultrafine particles that when we inhale them, it can go deep into the lungs. There's chemicals that are linked to serious lung conditions, volatile organic compounds. Some of these chemicals have been shown to be connected to cancer. Some heavy metals have also been found in these aerosols, such as nickel, tin, and lead. So again, because it's an ever-evolving industry and the research around what are the consequences to ingesting this, it's one of those situations where we have to keep studying it, and not enough time really truly has passed for us to actually look back and say, okay, maybe in 10 years' time, we'll have some longitudinal studies that will be able to look at a group of people that have been exposed to things like heavy metals and what have you. But we do know certainly some of these chemicals have been shown in the research to cause lung damage. But from a long-term perspective, we're still not sure, what some of those long-term consequences might be. In addition, we know that some of these vape devices can be used to vape other substances. And I guess main concern, what we're seeing is the vaping of cannabis. Okay, so a lot of people wonder about that. Cannabis can be vaped in an open system, which would require a person to, add cannabis to the e-juice. A pre-filled pod that you might purchase can also be altered with the vape substance to add cannabis in addition. I will say that cannabis extract, which includes cannabis vape product, did become legal in Canada in October 2019, but there's some regulations around that. We had seen out of the States in particularly some injury to lungs that when the research was done around it was showing a strong association between vitamin E, which is really used as a cutting agent for really, I guess, illegal and unregulated cannabis products. So we did see some of that happen in the United States. So just trying to keep an eye on that industry and what that means from a risk perspective. Again, from looking at other risks, we know that, nicotine itself is the thing that causes us most concern from its addiction potential, right? Nicotine, like I said to you earlier, is found in pretty much every vape product that's on the market now. And when we use nicotine, its connection to become dependent is certainly of concern, and especially of concern for our youth population. When we see users use nicotine at an earlier age, just like other substances from a youth developmental perspective, looking at brain development, it puts them at a higher risk for developing a dependency on nicotine at an earlier age. And there's certainly some long-term consequences that we know that can come from that. Even from a short-term risk perspective, vaping liquid that contains nicotine can be poisonous, especially to small young children. So even if they were to swallow that vape juice, small amounts can be detrimental to young children. Some people have asked and wondered about, what is the risk for, say, pregnant women? If you're looking for smoking cessation options as a pregnant person and you are wondering about a vape as an alternative, as a harm reduction, the research is still really out on that right now. And what Health Canada's position is that really, while vape products can contain lesser chemicals, harmful chemicals than cigarettes, it still contains nicotine. And that it will be best if a pregnant person were to consult with their physician about other possible smoking cessation aids and options. Okay. Okay. So one of the things that's kind of I guess popped up for us in the context that we're in now is what about COVID, right? and vaping? What do we know about that? So of course, evidence is limited. We've only been living in the COVID world. I say only. It's probably felt longer than a couple of years, but still. So looking, I guess, retrospectively and looking forward as well, in the risks that can come in, particularly for those individuals who choose to vape in the context of COVID. There has been a couple of studies that have been done, and this information has come from the Public Health Ontario, that showed us that COVID-19 diagnosis was more likely amongst individuals who vape, suggesting that they are a higher risk for COVID-19 infection. Because we know that vaping, what we do know is that vaping does have negative impact on lung function. And so if you are exposed to COVID-19 and you also vape, there is a higher risk for you to have negative health outcome and have a health impact, because of how the way that COVID affects your lungs and how you have a negative impact from vaping. So those two things together are not shown to be real good for users. And also if you are a dual user. So we know some people who try to use vaping as a smoking cessation aid may still continue to use cigarettes. So then you have those things working together, plus that COVID-19 exposure. So it can certainly be a negative for your health. What is of particular concern and interest from a youth perspective is that youth are the population that are more likely to share vapes. So we know, again, from a risk, if we are sharing a vape product, they're using the same mouthpiece, so that transmission of viruses and bacteria are certainly going to be higher. So I just wanted to highlight that in terms of the context of where we are. And I'm sure there'll be more evidence and research done on that in the future as vaping evolves and as COVID-19 evolves. But just to get back to, I guess, our biggest concern, especially from a youth perspective, is the nicotine itself. So we know nicotine, all the years of research around nicotine has shown that nicotine damages the developing adolescent brain, right? According to Health Canada, the Chief Medical Officers of Health for Canada and the Centre for Disease Control have come out and stated that vape products are not safe for young people, for young adults, or for pregnant women, or basically for anybody who does not currently use a tobacco product. Okay. And according to the Surgeon General, because the brain is not fully developed until the mid-20s, youth and young adults are uniquely at risk for those long-term, long-lasting negative effects of exposing the brain to nicotine while that brain is in development. Okay. Some of the things that we can see affected from nicotine from the brain development perspectives, it can have an impact on development of mood disorders. It could permanently and lower impulse control. Nicotine can also change the way the synapses are formed in our brain, which can certainly harm parts of the brain that are responsible for attention, learning, memory, and again, that control as well. And it's been shown a correlation between how nicotine can somewhat prime that adolescent brain for addiction to other substances. right? So what some of the current research is looking at is, are we seeing a transition from young people who have never used tobacco but are now vapors, transitioning into now becoming traditional cigarette users or traditional smokers, right? So like I just said earlier, nicotine and some of the other risks, it can affect our memory, our concentration, again, particularly for young people. It can impact cognition. And so when we think about all of those things combined, we can certainly see then a connection to maybe some behavioral issues, or maybe exacerbating some underlying concurrent health issue that might be there for that young person. And certainly that can impact their school performance and their social connections and their relationships with families and what have you. So just a word on our concern for nicotine. So if nicotine is our biggest concern, then, what is so different, I guess, about vaping than traditional cigarettes? And is there a particular risk to youth who are to choose a vape product, say, versus a traditional cigarette? And what I want to kind of highlight here is that before legislation passed recently, some of the vape products that we had out there, such as Juul or Vype, before the legislation changed, were exorbitantly high in the concentration of nicotine versus a traditional cigarette. So what you'd see here is that in a traditional cigarette contains roughly 1 milligram. Well, that's not roughly, it contains 1 milligram of nicotine. In a Juul pod, so I showed you that diagram earlier about could look like a little USB port, what have you. So that pod that contains that e-juice, for example, with Juul, that concentration was shown could be up to 41 milligrams of nicotine, whereas a Vype Pro product could contain 108 milligrams of nicotine. And so from a traditional use perspective, you can typically consume a pack of cigarettes in about 200 puffs. And you can typically consume a Juul pod or a vape pod in about 200 puffs. But what's really different, and I won't get into all the technical pieces around, nicotine salts and how that increases uptake and how you get more concentration of nicotine. But what we even see is just the traditional use. So because vapes don't require you to combust it, so you don't have to light it, you can access it anytime. So the usage period is actually longer, it's quicker, it's more frequent, and it can last longer. So for a youth, for example, who's in school and can hide the vape down in their sleeve or in their pocket, you could easily, use a vape and it can begin and end. So it doesn't need to start and stop. So because it doesn't need to be lit, it doesn't need to be put out. There's no smoke. Now there is that vapor that comes from it, so that could be visible to some people. You could vape in the washroom. There is no smell from it, so there's nothing to really indicate that use is happening. So again, that increases the usage time. It increases your how much and how often, how frequent, right? That you can actually, and then the exposure to the level of nicotine, which people have been quite, I guess, shocked about, to see how much concentration of nicotine is actually in some of these vape products. So like I just said, in this past July actually, in 2021, Health Canada announced nicotine concentration and vaping regulation. And that regulation has set a maximum concentration at 20 milligrams for vape products that's marketed in Canada. And this Regulation Act also prohibited the packaging and the sale of vape products if the nicotine concentration exceeded 20 milligrams. So that actually came into effect this past July, on July 8th. And then retailers, so if you were selling a vape product, you had to get rid of everything that you already had that was anything over 20 milligrams. And so again, that's trying to bring along vape products to traditional tobacco products, so that the user is going to access a vape product that's similar to a traditional tobacco product. So how do we know, again, if people, especially if you're interested from a prevention perspective, again, these flavored vapes, it might smell a faint smell of that might smell sweet. More often than not, it doesn't smell too strong. But again, looking at a device that looks unusual, maybe you never had it before, could, that charging device. So that's kind of like some indicators if you might pick up on. But from a behavioral perspective, we've been hearing, especially from a school perspective, that teachers and have had some concerns around youth leaving their classroom frequently to go to the washroom to use vapes. And then behaviorally, we've heard that when they can't use a vape product, that sometimes youth have become irritable, more anxious, restless, a change in mood. And what we're seeing there is really what we're talking about is nicotine withdrawal, right? So people who aren't able to use a vape product when their body's experiencing that need to do so, physiologically, they're going to go into withdrawal, right? And those, again, the withdrawal from a vape product is going to look similar to withdrawal from a traditional cigarette because it's the nicotine, right, that's causing that withdrawal. So what about those that are looking at using vape to quit smoking? Is it a true harm reduction approach? Can we say that it is a good alternative? What Health Canada says and what the position has always been and continues to be, even with the vaping landscape, is that if you are a smoker of traditional tobacco, quitting smoking is the best thing that you can do to improve your health, right? And we also know that if you were to completely replace cigarette smoking with vaping, you will reduce your exposure to harmful chemicals. Because while I said to you earlier, there's certainly not a lot of harmful chemicals that are in vape products, there is a significant less amount of those harmful chemicals compared to a traditional tobacco product. But it is important for Canadians to know that vaping does have health risks and that the potential short and long-term consequences and effects of vaping remain unknown ultimately. Right? So anyone who is a non-smoker, people and young people, like in particular, like I said, really should not vape. So if you are looking at vaping as a smoking cessation option, know that safer does not mean without harm. There are other options and available supports out there, like nicotine replacement therapies, gum, lozenges, the patch, what have you, medication can certainly be done in consultation with your healthcare provider. But what I guess I want to end this piece here is to really highlight that the goal is not only to stop smoking cessation or to use vape as a smoking cessation option, that the ultimate goal would be not vape either, right? So some people might think, well, if I only vape, then that's great. And while it might be good on one end, you're still exposing yourself to nicotine long term. So even if a person were to choose vaping as a smoking cessation option, the ultimate goal is that eventually they would quit the vaping behavior as well. So now I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk about the tobacco industry and kind of how it's gotten us where we are today and what some things might be changing to help, I guess, challenge the industry and the role that they play. The vaping industry is really the tobacco industry ultimately, in some respect. The tobacco and vaping industry spend millions of dollars every year. They target youth. And mainly the targeting of youth is not a new thing when it comes to any other substance. We know that as I said earlier, the younger that you are exposed, the brain is exposed, the more likely that you will become dependent. And if you're dependent, then you are a consumer for that product, potentially long-term, which is certainly, a business for the industry. Some of the ways to target young people, like I said earlier, is through the flavoring, fruit flavor, candy flavor. The tobacco industry has a history, like I said, of targeting young people, especially with these flavors. The actual industry itself, there's some research that tells us that they now own 35% of the vaping, that the tobacco industry owns 35% of the industry. And these vapes look cool, they look interesting, they look trendy, they look like they're fun, and they position it in such a way that it's hard to believe that something with a picture of a strawberry that looks like a pin, that has a sweet flavor, it's hard to think or to feel that this is actually very detrimental to my health, short-term and long-term. So a recent public opinion research commissioned by Health Canada found that amongst youth and young adults who ever vaped, more than half actually cited that the flavor and the smell was what drew them in the first place. Among adults 25 years and older, the flavor and the smell ranked at 30%, closely behind wanting to look at it as a harm reduction option at 36%. Most of the e-liquids on the Canadian market are flavored or have been flavored, which is popular amongst all vapors. Now, since 2018, the Federal Tobacco Vaping Products Act prohibited the sale and restriction and the promotion of vaping products to people under 18, specifically with those that have a candy or dessert flavor. And the act significantly restricts the promotion of vaping products specifically to youth, right? In the spring of 2019, Health Canada actually held consultations around flavoring and flavoring ingredients and trying to look at how could we influence some policy change to support that. So flavors used by Canadian youth in 2017, fruit topped at the very, at the top of the rating scale at 67.4%. The lowest for youth was about 5%, was mint or menthol. Okay. Now, some of these studies also show that adult smokers increasingly prefer fruit as well, but also mint and menthol and the sweeter flavored juices. A systematic review done by the Ontario Tobacco Research Unit in March of 2020 did not find any conclusive evidence that flavored e-cigarettes actually contributed to smoking cessation, because that has been an argument. Well, what if I want to use a flavored vape to help me achieve smoking cessation? Some of the research to date hasn't really supported that, that evidence that it would actually help any more than, any other flavored like mint, menthol, or tobacco. Actually, and in an assessment of findings on decreasing e-cigarettes by, young non-smokers and smokers looking for smoking cessation, they rely now on looking at restricting flavors on cigarettes and other tobacco products. Okay. The industry will lead you to believe, though, that vaping is a harm reduction option. And while harm reduction certainly has been well defined in the context of safe injection sites, in the lock zone, there's certainly been far less attention paid to harm reduction from a tobacco research perspective. But what we do know is that we need clearer guidelines, both on how to use the harm reduction language and the potential pros and cons on what these harm reduction strategies could be, right? So harm reduction has really been the rallying cry of the tobacco industry versus a public health harm reduction approach to tobacco. So what's been done to curb this emerging public health issue? Again, I mentioned earlier, we certainly have regulation both federally and provincially. Just want to highlight here that there are several acts that vaping is regulated in Canada. First, the Tobacco Vaping Products Act. We have the Canadian Consumer Products Safety Act. Food and Drug Act has vaping in there as well as the Non-Smokers Health Act, and recently that nicotine concentration vaping product regulation. And again, this helps restrict where people can purchase, where it can be sold, how it can be sold, what it can look like, what have you. Provincially, vaping is regulated in Newfoundland Labrador under the Newfoundland Labrador Tobacco and Vapor Products Control Act, and that was amended in 2016 to include vape products, e-cigarettes. And really, ultimately, it's our goal here is to try and reduce the number of young people who begin to smoke by restricting their access to tobacco and now vape products as well. Make it illegal for anyone to sell products to anyone in the province under the age of 19. So we also have the Smoke-Free Environment Act, which we also find legislative support for restricting and controlling vaping in the province. Again, it was amended in 2016 to include vaping. This really tries to help protect the public from exposure to secondhand smoke. There's still some research, obviously evolving around secondhand vape exposure, but we're really trying to help create healthy public environments for everyone that are safe, prohibiting smoking and vaping now, both indoor settings, and looking at how we can further enhance those restrictions from a workplace and from a recreation perspective. So we're trying to see our vaping legislation and regulation coincide with, current tobacco control legislation and policies. One thing recently that we've changed in Newfoundland and Labrador, which we have been, commended on from a control perspective, is that we've seen an increase in taxation on vape products. So January 1st, 2021, a tax rate of 20% was imposed. There has been some arguments for and against, but what we do know is the evidence is quite strong, and that shows us that taxation can be one of the best, healthy public measures to try and control, not only from a traditional tobacco control perspective, but we're seeing it now from a vaping control perspective as well, trying to reduce the access, in the first place. Other things that we are doing is we work with schools and the school board on, trying to create, from a comprehensive perspective, both a safe environment. So school boards have adapted their own policies around to include vaping as they would tobacco products on school grounds, try to educate youth, educate parents, educate staff on how to recognize vaping behavior, how to respond to that if they see it, and how to support youth who they feel might be experiencing a dependency to vape products. So what else can we do from a social work perspective? Obviously we can educate ourselves like we're doing here today to try to get a sense of, what the health issue is. From a personal perspective, if we have family members, young people, if we're working with young people, knowing and understanding the nature of this issue, that it is potentially can be creating a dependency for some, so it may not be as easy to stop this behavior as one might think. They might actually need some support, just as you would if you were trying to quit smoking, knowing that the nicotine withdrawals can be quite real and can be quite difficult for anyone who's trying to reduce their vape or quit their vape behavior. We can advocate for healthy public policy. We can keep abreast of what the research tells us around things such as increasing minimum legal purchase age, putting controls around certain vape products, like flavoring. This past summer, Health Canada, like I said, put out that call for input. You can, as an individual, you have an opportunity to engage in those public consultations, but then looking at what role can we play in advocating for that healthy public policy. And be aware of what's out there to support people who might be struggling with now, a vaping dependency. So I'm just I know we're getting short on time. I just want to draw your attention to some resources. So Health Canada launched a campaign in the spring of 2019 called Consider the Consequences of Vaping. If you visit the link here, this will bring you to a PDF of how to talk with young people about vaping. If you just go to the Health Canada website, under the Consider the Consequences, you'll have access to a slew of information, both for youth, for parents, for youth allies, help dispel some of the myths that are out there. There's some interactive materials that you can engage youth around. But locally, we have also been supporting the rollout of that of the Health Canada information, Act in particular, the Alliance for the Control of Tobacco, partnered with Health Canada in rolling out that campaign in our schools. So we actually did a traveling, I guess, roadshow, if you will, and went to several schools in the province. Of course, this was right around the, I guess, the onset of COVID. So some of that certainly got sidetracked. But in the last couple of years, ACT themselves have developed a campaign that you may be aware about. It's called the truthaboutvaping.ca. So you visit that URL, it'll take you right to that resource. This is a multi-layered, multi-dimensional awareness campaign that has looked at developing resources for parents, schools, school toolkits, and youth resources as well. So I just want to take a second and if I can share my screen, just to want to show you what you'll find when you visit the ACT website, the truthaboutvaping.ca. So this is the landing page. If you are a parent or a youth ally and you want to find information, particularly on how to support young people, you want to know about the facts about vaping, you'll see it's laid out quite easily. Here are the facts, resources for parents, tip sheets, conversation sheets. Here's a great resource if you are working with the school. A lot of great resources, right from lesson plans to policy suggestions to materials that schools can put up when schools are, I guess, back in session again physically. Other resources, any current vaping news, so as things change, if new legislation comes on, quite accessible. So again, all of the common questions that get asked about vaping you can find here. Other resources. And then we also have a youth-specific component to this website, because we know how youth access information, the type of information they want, and how they receive it is certainly different from parents and other youth allies. What you'll see here is a combination of infographics, videos. These videos, as I scroll down, you'll see there's 6 in total. You can certainly go on and give them a watch. You may have seen them. These were housed on various gaming sites, social media sites, ones that are particularly accessible by youth. Some parents have told us they didn't see them, and we said, no, maybe not, because unless you're a young person on a certain gaming site, you may not. But that was our intention, was to ensure that youth were, I guess, accessed to these videos. We are actually, and I say we because, again, I was part of the working group with ACT that helped roll out this campaign. We're just finishing up our evaluation, and I can't share the results with that, but that will be coming soon. What I will say is that from an evaluation perspective, is certainly encouraging, the feedback that we got from youth. So I invite you to visit that website to learn more, share with your network, with others, share with clients. So I will stop my screen and just, so here it is. That's the URL, truthaboutvaping.ca. You'll find all of that information there that I just showed you. Let's skip that one. So the last one I wanted to leave you with really also was, where do we direct people in this province? If you are looking for support around your vaping use, whether you're a young person, if you are pregnant, if you are a senior, so if you've anyone that has questions or concerns or needs support around traditional smoking cessation or vaping cessation, you're invited to visit the Smokers Helpline. They are a provincial body that certainly does a lot of great work around this issue, and they are working to change their landscape in terms of the support that they provide. They recognize that they are starting to get calls now from people who are vapors or are vapors, who are recognizing that they have a nicotine dependency now, and they want some support on shifting that and changing that. So you can certainly visit them at any time. Lots of different opportunities, in person, virtual, webinars. They have a brand new support program now that's built around meditation. And I also direct you to another great online resource out of British Columbia called Vape Free Me. So again, there's the URL. You can check that one out. It's a great resource for anyone looking for information and support around reducing or quitting vaping behavior. And that was a lot, I know. Went over a couple of minutes. I appreciate you sticking with me for that duration. I'll certainly hand it back to Annette to hopefully answer any of your questions.
That was wonderful, Tracy. Oh my goodness, thank you so much. That was an excellent presentation, and I was glad you kept going because we didn't get a lot of questions. Just some really great comments for you as a presenter. People say, "Wonderful presentation, thank you, great presentation." So you certainly covered the material very thoroughly, and it was very, very informative. So I guess I'll take this moment to thank you for this excellent presentation and for sharing your knowledge, expertise, and experience on vaping as a public health issue with us today. Certainly, vaping is an issue that many of us are concerned about as social workers, as healthcare professionals, as parents, and having this information is really, really important. I took away some things myself, having a teenager and a pre-teenager in my household, so that's excellent. And also the great resources that you shared. And the PDF of the PowerPoint is available in the resource section of the webinar platform, along with the link to the website that Tracy would have taken you to during the presentation. Just to note that members may claim 1 CPE credit on the required category for attending today's webinar. And we also ask that you complete the registration, the evaluation form. But I just want to conclude by saying that we know that social work is such a diverse profession, and it's wonderful to be able to promote the role of social work in population and public health. And informing and shaping healthy public policy is an important and critical role that we can all engage in. And Tracy, you certainly highlighted that for us today. So again, thank you so much for facilitating this webinar. And just want to say thanks again, everyone, for attending. Enjoy the rest of your day and stay safe.
Thank you.